The door to the sheriff's office slammed open so hard the hinges screamed, and Lenora Sutton stood in the frame with dust on her boots and blood on her sleeve and wild desperation in her dark eyes that told Elias Donnelly everything he needed to know before she even opened her mouth. He was already on his feet. "They are coming," she said, and her voice cracked on the last word like a branch giving way under too much weight. "Harlan Voss. He has 12 men. He knows you are here, Donnelly. He knows everything. He is going to burn this town to the ground before sunrise, and he is going to put a bullet in your skull while he does it." Elias Donnelly studied her for exactly 3 seconds. He was a man who measured everything in this world before he moved on it, a habit built from years of watching other men act fast and die faster. He measured the tremble in her jaw that she was working hard to contain. He measured the dried blood on her forearm, the way her left hand pressed flat against her side like she was holding something together. He measured the way her eyes moved around the room, not in the manner of a liar cataloging a story, but in the manner of a woman who had been hunted and had not yet convinced her body that she was safe. Then he walked around his desk, crossed the room in 4 long strides and looked directly at her. "You are staying here," he said. Lenora Sutton blinked. "Did you hear what I just told you?" "Every word," he said. "And you are still staying here." Something shifted behind her eyes. It was not gratitude, not yet. It was something more complicated than that, something that looked almost like the beginning of a fight she had not expected to have. She was a woman who had ridden 40 miles through the dark New Mexico night to warn a man she had every reason to hate, and he was telling her to stay. She did not know yet that this moment, this exact second in which she stood inside the amber lamplight of the Redemption Creek Sheriff's office with dirt in her hair and fury in her blood, was the moment that would split her life into before and after. She did not know that the man standing in front of her, with his steady gray eyes and his jaw set like carved stone, had been carrying a secret about her family for 2 years that would either destroy her or save her. She did not know that before the sun rose again over the red clay hills of New Mexico Territory in the summer of 1882, she would understand what it meant to be truly protected by someone who had chosen her without her permission. She did not know any of it yet, but this is how it had begun. 3 days earlier, Lenora Sutton had been standing on the dry wooden porch of her father's ranch house 11 miles east of Redemption Creek, watching a rider come up the long dust road at a pace that meant trouble. She had known trouble her whole life. She recognized it by the way it moved, fast and certain, without the polite slowness of a man making a social call. This rider was pushing his horse hard, and when he pulled up in front of the porch, she could see the foam on the horse's neck and the urgent sag in the man's shoulders. His name was Cord Mabry. He had worked for her father, Thomas Sutton, for 6 years before Thomas Sutton died of a fever 2 winters past and left the ranch and all of its beautiful, complicated problems to Lenora. Cord was not the sharpest man in New Mexico Territory, but he was loyal in the way that simple, honest men are loyal, without agenda, without condition, and that was worth more to Lenora than cleverness. He did not even get off his horse. "Miss Lenora," he said, and the look on his face turned something cold in her stomach. "Harlan Voss came to the south pasture this morning with 4 of his men. They drove off the last of the cattle, all 17 head. They took the horses from the lower pen too. Said it was debt repayment." Lenora pressed her palm flat against the porch rail. "My father owed Voss no debt," she said. "No, ma'am," Cord agreed. "But Voss is saying different. He has got some paper, a bill of sale or a note or something with your father's name on it. Jake Purdy over at the land office told me he has been filing paperwork all week. He is going to try to take the land, Miss Lenora, the whole ranch." Lenora's ranch was not a grand thing. It was 460 acres of high desert grassland, a main house that needed new roof beams, a bunkhouse, 2 wells, and approximately nothing else of material value. But it was hers. It was the only thing her father had ever built in a life that had been mostly defined by what he lost, and the thought of Harlan Voss's name on the deed made something dark and absolute rise in her chest. "Where is Voss now?" she asked. "Back at his spread, far as I know. But Miss Lenora, there is something else." Cord pulled his hat off and pressed it against his knee, a gesture she recognized as the prelude to something he did not want to say. "I heard from one of Voss's men, one who was drinking over in Mesquite Flats last night and talking too much. Voss is not just after the land. He has been collecting land all the way from here to the Pecos. And the sheriff over in Redemption Creek, that Donnelly fellow, has been building a case against him for months. Land theft, cattle theft, murder. 2 murders, they say." Lenora looked at him. "Why does that matter to me?" she asked. "Because Voss knows it," Cord said. "And Voss's man was saying that Voss is planning to put an end to it, to the case and to the sheriff both. He is gathering men, a lot of men, and the sheriff, he does not know it is coming." Lenora was quiet for a long moment. She looked out across the flat, dry land, the low scrub brush, the pale blue sky that the late June sun had already bleached to something like white. She thought about the kind of woman she was, and what that meant in a territory where a woman's choices were always smaller than a man's and always more expensive. She had never met Elias Donnelly. She knew his name the way everyone in 3 counties knew his name, a word spoken with a particular mix of respect and wariness. He had come to Redemption Creek 18 months ago, appointed by the territorial governor after the previous sheriff, a man named Cal Deering, had been found face down in the creek with 2 bullets in his back. Donnelly had arrived and within 3 months had cleaned up what everyone said could not be cleaned up: the gambling house on 5th Street, the stolen horse ring operating out of the Ortega barn, the protection racket that had been bleeding the town's merchants since before anyone could remember. He had done it all with methodical, relentless, quiet efficiency, and he had made enemies who stayed made. Harlan Voss was the biggest enemy. Lenora did not like the idea of Harlan Voss killing a lawman. Not because she had any particular love for lawmen. She had known enough of them to understand they were simply men with badges and the same complicated natures as all other men. She did not like it because if Voss killed the one man who was building a case against him, there would be nothing between Voss and the people of this territory for a very long time, including herself. She also did not like the idea of a man dying because nobody warned him. "I will go," she said. Cord stared at her. "Miss Lenora, it is a long ride and it is already afternoon." "Then I had better start now," she said, and went inside to get her rifle. She had ridden through the last hours of daylight and then through the dark, stopping once at a water hole to let her horse drink, and to press her hand against the gray's wound on her forearm, where she had gotten too close to a thorned branch in the dark at a full gallop, the blood already dried and pulling at the skin. She had not thought much about it. She had thought mostly about what she was going to say and how, because she understood that a woman riding alone into a sheriff's office at midnight with a story about hired guns and murder plots was likely to be met with skepticism at best and dismissal at worst. She had thought about that more than she had thought about the wound. She had not anticipated the way Elias Donnelly looked at her. She had expected a man who looked at her the way most men in authority looked at her, with the particular expression that suggested they were being patient, but were already deciding that whatever she had to say was probably less important than whatever they had already decided. She had been prepared for that look. She had sharpened herself against it for years. Elias Donnelly looked at her like she was the only thing in the room. Not in the way that made her uncomfortable, though she had had enough experience with that particular variety of male attention to recognize it immediately. He looked at her in the way that a person looks at something they have assessed and found to be real. He had looked at her like her words had weight and her presence had purpose, and he believed, without being told to believe it, that she had ridden a long way for a reason that mattered. And then he had told her to stay. She was still standing in the doorway. "You cannot keep me here," she said. "I have a ranch that needs tending, and I have already told you what I came to tell you." "You have a ranch with no cattle and no horses," he said, and his voice was completely even, "and a wound on your arm that needs cleaning and 12 armed men between you and that ranch who will be moving through this territory before dawn. You are staying here. She stared at him. "How do you know about my cattle?" "Because Harlan Voss has been stealing livestock from every small rancher between here and the Picos for 8 months," he said. "You are the last one. I have been waiting for him to make his move on your property because I knew when he did, it would mean he was ready to push all the way through. He has been building to something." He paused. "I did not expect you to come and tell me what it was." Lenora stepped fully into the room and let the door swing shut behind her. The lamplight settled around both of them, warm and close. The sheriff's office was small and spare, a desk, 2 chairs, a gun rack on the wall, a wood stove that had gone cold, a door leading back to 2 empty cells. Through the single window, the dark main street of Redemption Creek was perfectly still. "You were expecting me," she said. "Not you specifically," he said. "I was expecting someone from the Sutton Ranch to come to me eventually. I have been meaning to ride out there myself." Something crossed his face that was difficult to read. "I have been meaning to do that for some time." "Why?" she asked. He turned away from her then and went back to his desk, not in the manner of a man who was avoiding the question, but in the manner of a man who was deciding how much of an answer to give. He picked up a folded paper from the desk, turned it over once, and set it back down. "There are things about your father's dealings with Voss that I think you should know," he said. "But tonight is not the night for that conversation. Tonight we need to focus on keeping 12 armed men from riding through this town." Lenora felt something tight along the back of her neck. There it was, that particular quality to the word secrets, the way they occupied space before they were spoken, the way you could feel their shape in a room even before you knew their name. "Tell me now," she said. He looked at her. His eyes were gray, she noticed, the particular shade of gray that is not cold but not warm either, the color of sky just before the weather decides what it is going to be. He was not old, she realized. He was perhaps 30, perhaps 32, with the kind of face that belonged to a man who had spent years in the sun and the wind, lean and angular, and weathered into something that would look exactly the same for another 20 years. "There is a woman in the back room who needs that arm seen to," he said. "Her name is Dolores Reyes. She is the doctor's wife, and she has more actual medical knowledge than he does. After she tends to you, I will tell you whatever you want to know." Lenora wanted to argue. She could feel the argument sitting right behind her teeth, the instinctive refusal that she had developed over years of being told what to do by people who did not know her situation as well as she did. But her arm was throbbing in a dull, insistent way that she had been ignoring since the creek crossing 2 hours back, and she was also, under everything else, deeply tired. "Fine," she said, "but after." He nodded once, and there was something in that nod, a gravity and a respect that was different from what she had expected. He was not humoring her. He was agreeing with her, which was an entirely different thing. Dolores Reyes was a compact woman of perhaps 45 with silver-streaked black hair and hands that were quick and certain. She said little, cleaned the wound with a thoroughness that made Lenora grip the chair arm and breathe through her nose, and wrapped it in clean linen with practiced efficiency. When she was done, she looked at Lenora with eyes that had seen a great deal of the frontier, and had decided not to be surprised by any of it anymore. "You rode a long way tonight," Dolores said. "Yes," Lenora said. "For the sheriff," Lenora considered that. "For the town," she said, "I suppose." Dolores gathered her instruments and gave Lenora the look of a woman who did not fully believe her but had decided not to press the point. When Lenora came back into the front office, Elias Donnelly had the large map of the territory spread across his desk and was studying it with a tin cup of coffee at his elbow and another tin cup set on the edge of the desk nearest the door. She looked at the second cup. "It is not poisoned," he said without looking up. She crossed to the desk, took the cup, and drank. The coffee was strong and hot and tasted like the kind that had been sitting on a stove long enough to develop opinions. She looked at the map. Red Creek was marked. The Voss spread was marked. The road between them was marked with several small notations in pencil that she recognized as waypoints, cover positions, natural choke points. "You have already been planning for this," she said. For 6 weeks, he said. I knew he was going to move. I just did not know the timeline. He straightened and looked at her. Your information gives me the timeline. Before sunrise, you said. That is what the man told Cord Mabry, she said. Cord is reliable. He is not dramatic. Good. Donnelly set his cup down and crossed to the gun rack. He began taking weapons down in the methodical way of a man inventorying his resources. I have 3 deputies. Ben Quarry, who is sleeping at the boarding house, Marcus Lund, who is on the night watch over at the freight office, and Jorge Calderon, who is home with a wife and 2 children. He paused. I will need to wake all 3. You are going to fight them? Lenora asked. I am going to make it not worth their while to fight, he said. There is a difference. Voss is a careful man when he perceives a fair fight. He prefers overwhelming numbers. If I can position my men correctly and make the town look harder to take than he anticipated, there is a chance he pulls back. And if he does not, Donnelly looked at her steadily. Then we fight, he said, but I would prefer the first outcome. He moved toward the door, then stopped. He turned back, and there was something in his face now that was not the controlled, professional assessment he had been wearing since she walked in. There was something more personal than that, more careful. The things I said about your father, he said, about his dealings with Voss. You have not told me yet, she said. I know. He put his hand on the door frame. 2 years ago, when Voss first started moving on land in this territory, your father came to me. I was not yet the sheriff of Redemption Creek. I was a deputy out of Santa Fe working on a territorial land fraud case. Your father gave me information about Voss's operation, detailed information, records he had been keeping. He stopped. Lenora's hands were very still around the tin cup. He was a witness for the territorial government, Donnelly said. A protected witness. We had him set to testify before a federal judge in February of 1881. The year her father had died, the winter of the fever. He died in January, she said. Her voice was level. She had had 2 years to grieve. She was not going to fall apart in a stranger's office in the middle of the night. Yes, Donnelly said. He did. Was it the fever, she asked. The pause that followed was exactly 1 second too long. That is what the doctor recorded, Donnelly said. Lenora looked at him for a long moment. She understood what he was not saying. She understood it the way you understand something you have been half knowing for a long time, when the thing you suspected finally walks into the room and puts its name on itself. Voss, she said. I cannot prove it, he said. Not yet. The case I am building now includes it. The records your father gave me are part of the foundation. He met her eyes. I am sorry, Miss Sutton. I should have found a way to tell you sooner. I have been trying to protect the integrity of the case, and I have been concerned about your safety. She set the cup down on the desk. Her hand was steady. Her mind was doing something fierce and complicated, sorting through 2 years of grief and laying it against this new framework, this new terrible shape of the thing that had killed her father. She had thought it was the land, the hard winters, the isolation, the grinding work. She had thought he had simply worn out, the way men did on the frontier. She had not thought it was murder. Go wake your deputies, she said. We can finish this conversation later. Something moved through his eyes. It might have been relief. It might have been something else. You are still staying here while I do that, he said. The office is the safest place in town right now. I know, she said. He left. She stood alone in the lamplight with the map spread before her and the weight of a new grief that was somehow heavier than the old one because it had an author, a face, a name she was going to have to look at differently for the rest of her life. Harlan Voss had taken the cattle her father built. He had taken the horses. He was trying to take the land. And if Donnelly was right, he had already taken the most irreplaceable thing. She pressed her fingers to the map where the Sutton Ranch was marked, and she made herself a very quiet, very absolute promise. Outside, she could hear Donnelly's boots on the wooden sidewalk, moving fast and purposeful through the dark. The next 3 hours were unlike anything Lenora had experienced in her 28 years of life on the New Mexico frontier, and she had experienced a considerable number of unusual things. She watched Elias Donnelly work, and she understood within the first 20 minutes why Harlan Voss wanted him dead. He was methodical in the way that a person is when they have thought through every possibility and discarded the unnecessary ones. He woke his 3 deputies with quiet urgency and deployed them through the town with the economy of a man who knew exactly what each of them was capable of. Ben Quarry, broad-shouldered and slow-speaking but steady as the earth, went to the roof of the general store with a rifle and instructions to fire once as a warning if he spotted riders coming in from the south. Marcus Lund, young and quick-eyed, took the alley beside the livery stable. Jorge Calderon, who had ridden with Donnelly since Santa Fe, and who understood him the way that partners understand each other after years of shared danger, took a position at the north end of the main street, where the road came in from the direction Lenora had identified as the most likely approach. Donnelly himself moved through the sleeping town and woke 4 men who he said had agreed months ago to serve as a citizens' militia if the need arose. A blacksmith named Pete Ordaz, the owner of the hardware store, a German immigrant named Werner Fels who had served in the Prussian military and handled a rifle with frightening competence. 2 brothers named Hatch who ran the freight line and who had their own reasons for wanting Voss's operation dismantled. He did all of this in just over an hour, and when he came back to the office, Lenora was standing at the window watching the dark street and feeling the approach of something that had not fully arrived yet. "Now we wait," he said. She turned from the window. He had pushed the desk to the wall and pulled the 2 chairs into the center of the room, and there was something unexpectedly domestic about the arrangement that she noticed and then firmly set aside. "You are good at this," she said. "At waiting," he said. "At all of it," she said. "At managing people. Getting them where they need to be." He sat down in one of the chairs and leaned his elbows on his knees. He had taken off the heavy canvas coat he had been wearing, and in the lamplight she could see the badge on his vest and the sidearm at his hip and the bone-deep tiredness that he was not quite concealing. "Your father was good at it too," he said. "I met him 3 times. He was one of the clearest-thinking men I have ever had to work with in this territory." Lenora looked at him. "You knew him." "I respected him," Donnelly said carefully. "There is a version of knowing that is about admiration and trust. I had that with Thomas Sutton." He looked at the floor. "I was in Santa Fe when the news came. I had already been appointed to Redemption Creek, but I had not taken up the position yet. I wanted to come out to the ranch." He paused. "I did not, because I had been told the case required that I keep my distance from anyone connected to your father until I was established here and had rebuilt the evidentiary foundation he had given me." Lenora was quiet for a moment, processing this. "So you have known about me for 2 years," she said. "Yes," he said, "and you have been watching what Voss does to my ranch." "I have," he said. The word was quiet and direct, and she heard the weight in it, the thing that was not quite guilt but was adjacent to it. "You could have warned me," she said, "about what he was planning to do, about the land theft." "I could not have warned you in a way that did not risk the case," he said. "If Voss had known I was communicating with the Sutton Ranch, he would have understood that I had your father's records. He would have moved faster. He might have moved in a way that I could not have stopped." He looked up at her. "I made a choice, Miss Sutton. I believe it was the right choice for the greatest number of people." "That does not mean it was easy." She held his gaze. "Did you know," she said slowly, "that I had no money to hire help this spring? That I lost 2 of my permanent hands because I could not pay them? That I have been managing 400 acres alone since April?" "Yes," he said. She breathed in through her nose. She was a woman who had learned to manage her anger because anger was expensive, and she had never been able to afford the kinds of losses that anger led to. But sitting in this chair in the middle of the night with a freshly cleaned wound on her arm, and the knowledge that her father had probably been murdered, and that the man sitting across from her had known about it for 2 years, and had made calculated decisions about what to tell her, and when, she felt the anger very clearly and very personally. "This is over," she said. "You are going to tell me everything, the full account, every decision you made and why." "Yes," he said, "I will." The directness of that answer disarmed her slightly. She had expected defensiveness. She had expected the particular masculine habit of justifying the unjustifiable. Instead, he gave her honesty in that same quiet, complete way he gave everything else, and she found she did not know exactly what to do with it. "Is there anything else I should know tonight?" she asked. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "Your father in his last letter to my supervisor wrote that if anything happened to him, he hoped that his daughter would be looked after. That was the word he used. Looked after." He turned the brim of his hat over in his hands. He said she was the strongest person he knew and that she would probably be furious if she knew he had said it. Lenora looked away. She looked at the window and the dark street beyond it, and she pressed her lips together very hard. "He was right," she said, and her voice only broke on the last syllable, and she was proud that it only broke that much. The sound came 40 minutes later. A single rifle shot from the south, high and clear. Ben Quarry on the roof of the general store. Donnelly was on his feet before the echo died. He went to the window and looked south, and Lenora was at his shoulder a moment later. In the distance, just visible at the far edge of the moonlit road, there was the dark shape of riders. More than 12, she thought, maybe 16, maybe more. "He brought extra," she said. "He always does," Donnelly said. He was already at the door. He stopped. He turned and looked at her with an expression that was more than professional, more than tactical. "Stay in the office," he said. "If it goes badly, there is a door in the back of the cell block that opens to the alley. Take it east and do not stop." She looked at him. "I am not running." "Miss Sutton," he said. "I can shoot," she said. "I have been shooting since I was 8 years old, and I am quite good at it. If you are not going to use me, then you are wasting a resource." Something crossed his face that she thought might have been the first genuine smile she had seen there, quick and controlled but real. "The rifle rack," he said. "Take the Winchester on the left. Ammunition in the box on the bottom shelf." He paused. "And for the love of God, stay behind something solid." She was already moving. What happened next was not what Lenora had expected, and she had grown up in a territory where she expected almost anything. The riders came into the north end of the main street, and Harlan Voss was at their head. A broad, heavy-set man of perhaps 50, with a beard the color of dirty straw and the posture of a man who had never in his life been told no and believed it. She had seen him from a distance before twice, at the land office in Mesquite Flats. Up close in the moonlight, he had the particular look of a man who had convinced himself so thoroughly that he was righteous, that the conviction had become its own kind of ugliness. He pulled up his horse in the middle of the street and looked at the dark storefronts and the dark windows and the complete, absolute stillness of Redemption Creek at 2 in the morning. Elias Donnelly walked out of the doorway of the hardware store and stood in the middle of the street and looked at Harlan Voss and said nothing. "Donnelly," Voss said, "I am going to give you the opportunity to walk away." "That is generous," Donnelly said. "No." Lenora was in the recessed doorway of the general store, directly below where Ben Quarry was positioned on the roof. She had the Winchester up, and she was watching Voss's men with the focused attention that she had learned from years of watching for the thing that moved when everything else was still. What she saw, in the next 15 seconds, was what happened when a man built for overwhelming numbers encountered a situation where the numbers were less overwhelming than expected. She saw it in the way the riders near the back of the group began to look at the roof lines and the alleys, and the dark windows with the dawning recognition that the town was not sleeping and not empty, and that the architecture of easy violence they had ridden in expecting had been replaced with something else entirely. Donnelly said, clearly and without raising his voice, "Harlan Voss, you are under arrest for the land fraud claims documented in filings 44 through 67 at the Territorial Land Office, for the theft of livestock from 14 properties in Torrance and Lincoln counties, and for conspiracy in the murder of Thomas Sutton of this territory. Put down your weapons." The silence that followed was extraordinary. It was the silence of a man encountering something he had not prepared for, the public naming of the worst thing he had done, and the particular quality of that silence told Lenora that Voss had believed until this exact moment that nobody could name that thing. Voss drew his weapon. What followed was brief, loud, and ended in a way that Lenora would replay in her mind for years afterward. Quarry fired from the roof. Voss's horse reared. Voss fired wide. 3 of Voss's men at the back of the group turned and rode hard in the direction they had come. Marcus Lund came out of the alley. Jorge Calderon came down the North Street. Werner Fels, positioned in his own hardware store, fired through the front window at the ground in front of the lead riders, and the crack and spray of it sent 2 more men bolting. When it was done, Harlan Voss was on the ground with his arm twisted behind him and Elias Donnelly's knee between his shoulder blades, and 4 of Voss's remaining men were on their knees in the street with their hands up, and the rest had scattered into the New Mexico dark. Nobody was dead. Lenora lowered the rifle. She had not fired it. She was both relieved and, she admitted to herself, very slightly disappointed, which was a reaction she found both honest and slightly concerning about herself. Donnelly had Voss in the back cell before the dust had settled. His deputies rounded up the 4 surrendered men and put them in the county jail over in Mesquite Flats, where there was more room. Jorge Calderon rode hard to send a wire to the territorial marshal in Santa Fe, and by the time the sun came up over the red clay hills of New Mexico Territory and turned the sky the color of fire, the town of Redemption Creek was awake and loud with the kind of stunned, gratified noise that a community makes when it has just been delivered from something that has been pressing on it for a long time. Lenora sat on the front step of the sheriff's office with the Winchester across her knees and watched the town come alive in the early morning light. She was very tired. She was also, underneath the tiredness and the grief and the sharp, complex thing that had been growing in her chest since she walked through this door, something that she had no immediate word for. She would find the word for it later. Donnelly came and sat beside her on the step. He was not a man who sprawled. Even sitting, he carried himself with the same deliberate economy of motion, and he set his forearms on his knees and looked out at the street the same way she was looking at it. They sat like that for a few minutes without speaking, and it was not the uncomfortable silence of strangers but something different, the silence of 2 people who have just come through something together and are letting it settle. "What happens to Voss now?" she asked. "The territorial marshal will come up from Santa Fe," he said. "With your father's records, the case is solid. The federal land fraud charges alone will put him away for 20 years. If I can prove the murder longer." He paused. "Your testimony about the stolen cattle and horses will be part of the case, if you are willing." "I am willing," she said immediately. "Good." He was quiet again for a moment. "Land will be restored to you. The cattle I cannot promise. Some of them have probably been sold already. But the land, the deed that will come back to you." She looked at the side of his face. He was watching the street, watching his deputies, watching the town settle into its morning rhythms, and she had the sense that he was also watching something inside himself that he had been watching for a long time. "You feel responsible," she said. He did not answer immediately. "Your father helped me," he said finally. "He took a significant personal risk to give me the information that allowed this case to be built. He trusted the system, and the system took too long." He turned and looked at her. "Yes, I feel responsible. What happened to my father was not your fault," she said. "I know that," he said. "I also know it does not matter whether it was my fault. It happened." She looked at him for a long moment. "My father was a man who believed that doing the right thing had a cost and that the cost was worth paying," she said. "He told me that when I was 12 years old after he testified against a cattle rustler and the man's brother broke 2 of his windows. He was not naive. He understood what he was doing when he went to you." She paused. "Whatever he decided for himself." Donnelly held her gaze, and she saw something in his face that was different from the controlled professionalism he had been wearing all night, something rawer and more personal, a kind of gratitude that was almost painful to look at. "Thank you," he said, "for telling me that." "It is the truth," she said. The sun was fully up now, warm and broad across the street. Someone had started a fire in the bakery, and the smell of bread came down the street on the early morning air, and Lenora realized with sudden clarity that she had not eaten since midday yesterday. Her stomach made its opinion known. Donnelly heard it. His mouth curved, that same quick, controlled smile. "Come on," he said, and stood up. He held out his hand, and she looked at it and then took it and let him pull her to her feet, and neither of them stepped back right away, and the space between them in the morning light was warm and very specifically itself. "I cannot stay in Redemption Creek," she said. "I know," he said. "I have a ranch that needs tending." "I know," he said. "I am going to need to hire new hands before fall." "I know," he said. "I can ask around." He looked at her, and there was something careful and deliberate in the way he held himself now that she recognized as a man deciding how much of a risk to take. "I also have a reason to ride out to the Sutton Ranch," he said. "Official business, the case materials. There are documents there that were part of what your father kept filed at the ranch itself. I will need to retrieve them." "Official business," she said. "Yes," he said. There was a pause. "And I make a reasonable cup of coffee." "I have had your coffee," she said. "I make a better cup than that when I have time," he said. She looked at him. She was standing on a step, and he was standing on the ground below it, and they were almost exactly at eye level. And she noticed this as a thing distinct from the other things she had been noticing about him all night, noticed it in a way that was specifically personal. "When will you come?" she asked. "Monday," he said. "It is Thursday today," she said. "I need 3 days to process Voss and file the initial paperwork," he said. "Monday," she nodded once. She looked out at the street. She looked back at him. "I will have the records ready," she said. They went to breakfast at the bakery, and the whole town seemed to find a reason to come in while they were eating, to clap Donnelly on the shoulder or shake his hand, or, in the case of 2 elderly women who ran the dressmaker's shop, and had clearly decided they had strong opinions about this, to look pointedly and approvingly at the person sitting across from him. Lenora ate eggs and bread and drank coffee that was considerably better than the tin cup variety, and she watched Elias Donnelly with the townspeople of Redemption Creek, and she understood something that she had not understood before, which was that this man was loved here. Not admired, not respected in the wary, distant way that lawmen were often respected, but genuinely loved in the way that a community loves someone who has chosen to stay with them and protect them when staying and protecting was genuinely hard. He was patient with everyone. He answered questions directly. He thanked people for their help, and he meant it. He talked to the hardware store owner Werner Fels for 10 minutes in German, which Lenora had not anticipated, and the old man's face opened up like a window in spring. She found herself watching him with something that she recognized only because she had spent 28 years learning to be very honest with herself about her own inner states. She recognized it as the beginning of wanting. The early form of it, before it has become anything it can be named, when it is still just a direction that your attention keeps moving in. She rode out Monday morning before he arrived. She had gone home on Thursday, slept for 12 hours, and spent the next 3 days doing the work that needed doing, fixing a fence line at the south pasture, hauling water to the kitchen garden, mending the roof beams that had been threatening to give for a year. She worked with the fierce, focused energy that she always worked with after a period of crisis, burning through it like a fire finding fresh fuel. She found her father's records on Saturday morning, packed in an oilskin box under the floorboards of his study, exactly where she had not known to look because she had not known what she was looking for. She sat on the floor of the study for a long time with the box in her lap, looking at her father's handwriting on the pages inside. He had been meticulous. Dates, figures, names, transactions. The whole architecture of Harlan Voss's land fraud scheme laid out in careful columns in Thomas Sutton's even, schoolteacher's hand. He had been planning to testify. He had been building this for years before he ever went to the territorial authorities. He had been watching and documenting with the patience and precision of a man who understood that the only way to win was to be more thorough than the opposition. She was more like him than she had known. She was standing on the porch with the oilskin box when Donnelly rode up the long dust road on Monday morning at 10:30. He was on a good bay horse, a horse that moved with the particular quality of an animal that has been well treated and knows it. He was in a clean shirt, she noticed. He had made an effort. "I am early," he said, looking up at her from the saddle. "You said Monday," she said. He swung down. He looked at the ranch, the house, the bunkhouse, the clean lines of the fence, the kitchen garden running along the east side of the house. He looked at all of it the way she had learned to read people, carefully, with attention to what was really being assessed. "Your father kept this place very well," he said. "I keep it now," she said. He looked at her. "Yes," he said. "You do." She showed him the records. They sat at the kitchen table and he went through every page with the same methodical care he brought to everything, asking her questions occasionally, noting things in his own ledger. He was thorough and she was precise, and it was oddly comfortable, working like that with someone at the same table, the morning light coming through the kitchen window and the coffee on the stove and the silence between them easy and productive. "This is everything I needed," he said, when they had been through all of it. "More than everything. This is enough to ensure Voss never sets foot outside a federal prison." "Good," she said. He closed the ledger. He looked at her across the table, and there was that quality again, that particular attention. "How are you managing?" he asked. "Truly." "I am managing," she said. "That is not what I asked," he said. She looked at her hands flat on the table. Outside, a meadowlark was singing in the scrub and the morning was very bright and very clear. "I am angry," she said. "I think I will be angry for a while, about my father, about the 2 years I did not know." She looked up. "But I am also grateful that someone was building a case, that it will matter, that what he did will count for something." "It will count for a great deal," Donnelly said quietly. "Without your father's records, the case would have taken another year at least to build independently. He saved lives. The people Voss would have stolen from, the people Voss might have killed to protect his operation. Your father prevented that." She pressed her lips together and looked away. "He would have liked hearing that," she said. "I know," he said. "I am sorry he cannot." They were quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I spoke to Werner Fels on Friday. He has a nephew who is looking for steady ranch work. Good man, from what Werner says. Experienced with cattle." He paused. "If you are interested." She looked at him. "You asked around." "I said I would," he said. She felt the thing she had been noticing since Thursday's shift become slightly more specific in the direction it was moving. "Send him out," she said. "I will speak with him." He nodded. He picked up his coffee cup and drank and set it down. He did not move to leave. She did not say anything that would prompt him to. "There is a social on Saturday," he said, "in Redemption Creek. Mrs. Alvarez organizes it every summer. Music, food. The whole town comes." He looked at the surface of the table. "I am usually required to attend in my official capacity, which means I spend most of it standing near the door looking responsible." A pause. "It would be less tedious if there were someone to talk to." Lenora looked at him. "Are you inviting me to a social event?" she asked. "In my official capacity," he said, and the corner of his mouth moved in the way she had come to understand was as close as he came to open amusement. "As a resource," she said. "As a person," he said, and his voice shifted just slightly, losing its wryness, becoming something more direct. "I am inviting you as a person, Lenora." It was the first time he had used her given name. She had not told him to use it. She was not sure when it had become appropriate for him to use it, only that when he did, she did not mind. "All right," she said. "Saturday." He smiled then, fully and without the control, and it changed his face completely, made it younger and more open and considerably more dangerous to her equilibrium. "I will ride out Friday evening," he said, "so you do not have to make the trip alone." "I make the trip alone all the time," she said. "I know," he said. "Friday evening." She looked at him for a moment and then she said, "Fine, Friday evening." The summer social in Redemption Creek was everything small-town gatherings in the New Mexico territory were in 1882. which was to say it was loud and warm and full of fiddle music and children running between the adults' legs and the smell of roasting corn, and too many people in proximity, and the particular social energy of a community that did not have a great many opportunities to gather formally, and was making the most of this one. Lenora had been to these kinds of gatherings before. She had always attended them as an unattached woman of a certain practicality, fending off the well-meaning matchmaking of older women and the overly confident approaches of various eligible men with the same efficient diplomacy she brought to all social situations. She had never minded it. She had simply never been particularly moved by any of it. She was moved by Elias Donnelly standing in the lamplight of the town square in a clean dark coat, watching her come across the street toward him with an expression that he was clearly attempting to keep neutral and was not entirely succeeding at. "You look different," he said. She was wearing a dress instead of her usual riding clothes, a deep blue cotton dress that had been her mother's and that she had taken in at the waist last winter. Her hair was down instead of pinned back under her hat. She was aware of the difference. She was also aware of him being aware of it. "You look different too," she said, which was true. He was more at ease here slightly than she had seen him, though still carrying that watchful quality that seemed to be simply part of how he was built. "Come and have something to eat," he said. "Mrs. Ortega has made tamales, and if we do not get there first, the Hatch brothers will eat all of them." She laughed. It surprised her slightly. She did not laugh easily as a rule. They ate tamales and drank cold lemonade and listened to the fiddle players and talked for 3 hours with the ease of people who had somehow bypassed the awkward early stages of acquaintance and arrived somewhere further along without quite accounting for how they got there. She told him about growing up on the ranch, about her father's love of books and his terrible singing, and his habit of naming all the horses after Roman emperors. He told her about growing up in Missouri, about reading law before it became clear that the frontier needed sheriffs more than it needed lawyers, about the older brother who still farmed the family land and who wrote him letters with exactly the same frequency whether he was in danger or not. "Does he know what you do?" she asked. "He knows I keep order," Donnelly said. "He is content not to know the specifics." She smiled. "And you are content for him not to." "Some people," he said, "should be protected from specifics. And you decide who those people are," she said, and heard the slight edge in her own voice, that reference to the decision he had made about her. He heard it too. He looked at her directly. "I made the wrong call," he said. "With you specifically. You had a right to know about your father." She looked at him. "Why are you admitting that?" "Because it is true," he said, as if this were the most obvious thing in the world. "I make mistakes. I would rather admit them and account for them than defend them." She looked at him for a long moment, standing in the lamplight with the fiddle music behind them and the night air warm around them and the smell of summer in the high desert, sage and dust and something sweet from the cottonwood trees along the creek. "You are a surprising person," she said. "How so?" he asked. "I expected to find you difficult," she said. "Most men in positions of authority are difficult. Most men in positions of authority believe the authority is the point," he said. "I believe the people it serves are the point. That is a different thing." She was looking at him with the full warmth of what had been building in her since that first night in his office, and she did not look away from it. "Yes," she said, "it is." Werner Fels's nephew arrived at the ranch the following week. His name was Heinrich Fels, though he went by Henry. He was 26 years old, powerfully built, and he could indeed work cattle with remarkable competence. He was also, Lenora noticed with amusement, completely devoted to his horse and completely incapable of small talk, which made him an ideal ranch hand and an occasionally challenging conversational partner. She hired him on the spot and spent the rest of August doing the work of a functional ranch with an actual helper for the first time in months. The difference it made was significant. There was a quality to working alongside someone, to sharing the weight of a task, that she had been pretending she did not miss. Elias Donnelly rode out every Monday. It started as official business. checking the progress of the case, ensuring she had everything she needed for her upcoming testimony, answering her questions about the proceedings. But the Monday visits extended into Tuesday visits, and then into occasions when he was simply present for dinner, or for a long ride along the fence line in the late afternoon when the light turned the desert gold, and the conversation turned to the kinds of things that two people who are in the process of discovering each other talk about. Books they had read, things they believed, the places they had been and the places they wanted to go. He told her about the case, carefully and completely, which was the thing she had told him she required of him. He told her about the evidence, about the indictment, about the things her father's records had enabled. He told her all of it, and she listened and asked sharp, precise questions, and held the information with the same steady composure she brought to everything, though sometimes, in the evenings, she would go outside alone and stand in the yard and look at the dark hills and feel her grief privately before she came back in. He understood, without being told, that this was what she needed. She told him about the ranch, about what it meant to her and why, about the specific way that land becomes a person's identity in this territory, not through pride but through necessity, through the years of drought and wind and frost and work that become part of your body in a way that nothing else ever does. She told him about her father's books, and she showed them to him, a small shelf of worn volumes that were one of the most valuable things in the house. He took them down one by one with careful, respectful hands. One afternoon in late August, sitting on the porch in the cooling evening, he said, "I have been offered a position in Santa Fe." She looked at him. "The territorial marshal's office," he said. "It would mean leaving Redemption Creek." She was very still. "Will you take it?" she asked. He looked out at the hills. "I have not decided yet," he said. "There are things to consider." She looked back at the hills too. The sky was the color of peaches. She could hear Henry Fells moving around in the barn, settling the horses for the night. "What things?" she said. He turned and looked at her. The evening light was on his face, warm and golden, and he had that quality of a man who has decided to say the real thing. "The most important thing I have to consider," he said quietly, "is whether the person who has become essential to me in the last 2 months would prefer I stayed or went." She looked at him for a long moment. Her heart was doing something large and unhurried in her chest. "Essential," she said. "Yes," he said. "That is a significant word," she said. "I am a careful person," he said. "When I use a word like that, I mean it precisely." She looked at him, and she felt the thing that had been growing in her since that first night, the direction her attention had been moving in all this time, settle into something clear and certain and absolutely hers. "I would prefer you stayed," she said. He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he said, "Then I will stay." They were quiet together in the evening light, and the settlement of that decision between them was as simple and as complete as a door closing on the right side. The Voss case went to federal court in October of 1882. Lenora testified on a Wednesday, standing in the courtroom in Santa Fe in her good dress and her father's best wool coat, and she gave her testimony in the clear, precise manner that she gave everything, looking at the faces of the jury and the judge, and not at Harlan Voss, who sat at the defense table with his lawyers and his diminished authority, and the particular deflated quality of a man who has been stripped of the thing he built his identity around. When she left the stand, she walked past Voss and she looked at him directly, which she had not allowed herself to do while she was testifying. He was smaller than she had thought. Not in physical terms, but in the essential way, the way that people who derive all their substance from what they have taken sometimes appear when the things they have taken are removed. He did not look back at her. She had not expected him to. Elias Donnelly was waiting for her in the corridor outside the courtroom. He had testified the previous day, 2 hours of carefully organized evidence presented with the same methodical thoroughness that she had come to understand was simply how he operated. He was standing with his back against the wall with his arms folded, and when she came through the door, he looked at her with a quality of attention that had nothing to do with the case. "How was it?" he asked. "It was good," she said. "It felt necessary and it felt right, and I think it went well." She paused. "I told them about my father, the kind of man he was. The judge let me say it." He held her gaze. "Good," he said. "He should be known." She looked at him, and the corridor was empty, and the afternoon light was coming through a window at the far end, and she was in Santa Fe for the first time in 3 years, and everything was different from how it had been 3 years ago, and most of the things that had changed were in the direction of better. "Elias," she said. She had been using his given name for 2 months. She still liked the weight of it. "I want to have dinner somewhere tonight that is not the hotel dining room. I want to go somewhere that has good food and music, and where I can wear this dress for a reason other than a federal trial." He looked at her for a moment, and then the smile that she had come to understand was the real version of him, open and warm and personal, came across his face. "I know a place," he said. They had dinner in a small restaurant near the plaza that had been there since the Mexican period, and had the quality of a place that would outlast everything that came after it. The food was extraordinary. The music was a guitarist in the corner playing music that was old and intricate and deeply beautiful. They drank wine, which Lenora did not often do, and talked about things that had nothing to do with the case and nothing to do with the ranch. They talked about what Lenora's life might look like in 10 years, and about whether Donnelly's brother would ever visit New Mexico, and about whether the territorial government was going to make the statehood push seriously, and what that might mean for people who had been here long before the territory became formalized at all. And somewhere in the middle of it, between the second glass of wine and the end of dinner, with the guitarist playing something soft and unhurried in the corner, and the candlelight steady on the table between them, Elias Donnelly reached across and covered her hand with his. He said, "I want to say something, and I want to say it correctly because I have been thinking about how to say it for approximately 6 weeks." She looked at their hands on the table. His was larger and rougher and very warm. "Then say it," she said. "I love you," he said, directly and completely and without qualification in the way he said everything. "I love you in the way that I think I have been moving toward since before I understood what I was doing. I love the specific way you approach the world, the clarity of you, the honesty of you, the fact that you rode 40 miles in the dark to warn a man you had never met because it was the right thing to do." He paused. "I love who you are, and I would very much like to continue to have the privilege of knowing you for as long as you will allow it." Lenora looked at him across the candlelight and the table and the small, careful distance between them, and she felt something in her that had been held taut for a very long time. For years, she thought, not just months, but years of being alone and capable and fine, that something released. "You are the most careful speaker I have ever met," she said. "You do not say things you do not mean." "No," he said. "Then I believe you," she said. She turned her hand under his and held it properly. "And I love you too. Which I know because I have been asking myself all autumn whether what I was feeling was admiration or affection or something else, and the something else turned out to be love, which I arrived at through the same process I used to arrive at everything, which is thorough and honest inquiry." He laughed, a full and genuine laugh that she had not heard before in quite that form, and it was the best thing she had heard in a long time. They came back from Santa Fe at the end of October, and the verdict came 2 weeks later. Harlan Voss was convicted on 23 counts of land fraud, theft, and conspiracy to commit murder. He was sentenced to 30 years in federal prison. He would not see New Mexico territory as a free man again. The people in the county who had been affected by Voss's operation began the slow process of reclamation. Land deeds were restored. Livestock claims were processed where they could be. Some of what had been taken could not be returned because it was gone, sold off, or consumed. But the legal framework was in place, and the man who had built the operation was gone. Lenora got her deed back the second week of November. She held the paper in both hands in the kitchen and read her own name on it twice, and then set it on the table and sat with it for a while. Donnelly was sitting across from her. He had been at the ranch for 3 days, helping with the repairs that had been delayed all year, the roof beams finally and a new fence section on the north pasture, and the work that Henry Fells could not do alone. He watched her with the deed and waited. "It is official," she said. "It is official," he said. She looked up at him. "My father would have been very pleased." "Yes," he said. She folded the deed carefully and placed it in the oilskin box that had held her father's records, the records that had become the spine of a case that had freed 3 counties' worth of land and put a murderer in prison. She placed the deed on top of those papers and closed the box. "Elias," she said. "Yes," he said. "I want to ask you something." He waited. "You turned down the Santa Fe position," she said. "You said it was because of things to consider. I want to make sure that one of the things you were considering was your own happiness and not only mine." He looked at her with that particular quality of attention, the one that made her feel seen in the specific way she had not known she was looking for until she found it. "I am happier in Redemption Creek than I have ever been anywhere else," he said. "That is not a difficult thing to say because it is completely true. The position in Santa Fe would have been a step in a career, and a career is a means, not an end. The things I have here, the work I believe in, the community I care about." He paused. These are ends in themselves." She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "Then I have another thing I want to ask you." He raised an eyebrow. "I am not a woman who does things by convention simply because they are convention," she said. "I have lived alone and run this ranch alone and made my own decisions since I was 26 years old, and I am good at it. I do not need to be looked after in the way that some people mean when they use that word." She paused. "But I find that I want a partner, a genuine one in the fullest sense of that word. Someone to build this place with and to think with and to share the particular weight of a life with." She looked at the table. "I would like that person to be you." She looked up. He was looking at her with the full warmth of the smile she loved. "Lenora Sutton," he said, "are you proposing to me?" "I believe I am," she said. "Good," he said, "because I have been carrying this in my coat pocket for 3 weeks trying to find the right moment." He reached into his vest and set a ring on the table between them. It was a simple silver band with a single small turquoise stone, the color of the New Mexico sky, and it was exactly right in the way that things are when chosen by someone who pays close attention. "I was going to ask you after the verdict came back, but then the deed took longer to process, and then I kept waiting for the right moment, which apparently was going to be you proposing first." She laughed. She picked up the ring and looked at it, and then she held it out to him. "Put it on," she said. He took her hand and slid the ring onto her finger and held her hand in both of his, and they looked at each other across the kitchen table in the November light. And the world was very quiet and very good. They were married in December, on a Saturday 2 weeks before Christmas, in the small church in Redemption Creek that Mrs. Alvarez helped decorate with pine branches and dried flowers, and what appeared to be every candle in the territory. The whole town came, which was not surprising since the whole town had been following the development of this particular situation, with the kind of invested interest that small communities bring to the relationships of the people they care about. Werner Fells wept openly and did not appear embarrassed about it. Henry Fells stood in the front row looking both proud and as though he would prefer not to be standing in a church in his good clothes. Jorge Calderon and his wife sat beside Ben Quarry and Marcus Lund. Dolores Reyes, who had cleaned Lenora's wound on that first night, sat in the third row and had the look of a woman who had understood what was going to happen before anyone else did. Lenora wore her mother's good dress, a cream-colored cotton that had been let out at the waist and hemmed up and pressed within an inch of its life. She carried dried sage and winter-blooming desert flowers, and she walked down the aisle with Henry Fells at her side, because she had no family left and Henry had become, in the way that people do when they share daily work and daily proximity, something close to a younger brother. Elias Donnelly stood at the front of the church and watched her come toward him with an expression that made every woman in the church catch her breath and made at least 3 men clear their throats and look at the floor. The minister kept the ceremony brief by request, Lenora had been very specific about this, and the vows they said were simple and direct, in the way they both preferred things to be. When it was done, and the minister said the traditional words and Donnelly kissed her, the church made the particular sound that rooms make when something is resolved that everyone present wanted resolved. They had the reception in the town square with the same fiddle players from the summer social, and Mrs. Ortega's tamales and Werner Fell's producing a bottle of German brandy that he had been saving for a special occasion. And they danced in the cold December night with the stars very clear and very bright over the high desert, and the fires lit around the square, and the warmth of the whole gathered community around them. Lenora danced with her husband, which was a word she was still getting used to applying to this person, and she thought about how exactly 1 year ago she had been managing a failing ranch alone with no cattle and no horses and a grief she did not yet know the full shape of, and about how much had changed and how completely. He looked at her as they danced and he said quietly, "What are you thinking about?" 1 year ago, she said. "And now," he said. She looked at him. "Now is considerably better," she said. "Yes," he said, "it is." Winter at the Sutton Ranch with an actual second person, and it was different from anything Lenora had expected, not because she had not accounted for what it would mean practically. She had in detail, but because the emotional quality of it was different from her imagination of it. She had expected companionship. She had expected shared labor and shared decision-making, and the warmth of not being alone in a house in the January cold. She had not expected the particular texture of daily intimacy, the way that sharing mornings and evenings with a person built an accumulated understanding of them that was different from and deeper than anything that conversation alone could build. She learned that Donnelly woke early and was useless before his first cup of coffee, and then was completely focused for the rest of the morning. She learned that he read at night always, every night without exception, and that if she sat beside him while he did, he would sometimes read passages aloud without being asked, which she loved. She learned that he was methodical about everything in the household the way he was methodical about everything else, that he kept a detailed account of their supplies and expenses, and could tell you at any moment how much flour was in the pantry, and when they would need to ride to town for more. She learned that he had nightmares occasionally, the particular residue of years of work that brought him into proximity with violence, and that when he did he would lie awake very still, and she had learned not to ask about it directly but to simply put her hand on his arm and wait, and that this was sufficient. She suspected he was learning a parallel set of things about her. Spring came and the ranch came back. With Donnelly's salary from the sheriff's office added to the ranch income, they were able to hire a second full-time hand, a Tejano cowboy named Aurelio Santos who could do things with horses that seemed to border on communication, and to restock with cattle, a small herd to start, 12 head purchased from a rancher 2 counties over who had been looking to scale down. Henry Fells had grown into the role of foreman so naturally that Lenora had given him the title formally and raised his pay, and the look on his face when she told him had been worth more than the monetary cost. On a warm March evening, sitting on the porch after dinner, Donnelly said, "I want to show you something." He handed her a piece of paper. It was a letter from the territorial governor's office, acknowledging the contribution of Thomas Sutton to the land fraud investigation, and recommending that his records be preserved in the territorial archives as a matter of historical and legal record. She read it twice. She folded it carefully. "They will know who he was," she said. "They will know," he said. She pressed her hand over her eyes for a moment. Not in grief, exactly, but in the particular form of release that comes when something you have carried for a long time is finally witnessed. In April, she told him she was expecting. She told him at breakfast on a Tuesday, directly and without preamble, which was exactly how she told him everything. He sat very still for a moment. Then he set down his coffee cup and he looked at her with an expression that she would remember for the rest of her life. "Are you well?" he asked. "Are you feeling well?" "I am perfectly well," she said. somewhat tired, which is apparently normal and which I find irritating." He stood up and came around the table and sat beside her and took both her hands in his, and he said nothing for a moment, just held her hands and looked at her, and there was something in his face that was not control and not professionalism and not the steady management of self that she had come to understand was how he protected himself from the world. There was simply and completely joy. "A child," he said. "Yes," she said. "In the autumn, I think. Late September." "We should tell Dolores Reyes," he said immediately. "I have already spoken to Dolores," she said. "She confirmed it and gave me instructions and was gratifyingly matter-of-fact about all of it." He laughed. "Of course you already spoke to Dolores." He brought her hands up and pressed his mouth to her knuckles. "Lenora." "Yes," she said. "I am very happy," he said. "Good," she said. "So am I. The summer was good." The ranch prospered in the straightforward, satisfying way that ranches prosper when they are well run and well staffed, and have enough water in a dry year, which this year was. And the work was hard and productive, and Lenora managed it with her usual thoroughness while also managing the reality of a pregnancy in the New Mexico summer heat, which required adjustments she made without complaint, but also without pretending they were not needed. Donnelly was magnificent about it in a way that she had not fully anticipated and was deeply grateful for. He did not treat her as fragile. He did not make decisions for her. He asked, consistently, what she needed and what she wanted, and then he helped her get it. He also, on the evenings when the heat had been particularly punishing, and she was sitting on the porch with her boots off and her hair loose and no particular desire to move, would come and sit beside her with 2 glasses of cold water and a book and simply be present, which was the thing she had needed without knowing she needed it. She told him this one evening. She said, "I want you to know that you are very good at this. At being present without being intrusive." He looked at her. "It is something I have been working on," he said. "Since when?" she asked. "Since about the second Monday I came to this ranch," he said, "when I realized that you were a person who had been managing your own needs for a long time and was very good at it, and that the worst thing I could do was imply otherwise." She looked at him steadily. "You are remarkably perceptive for a man," she said. "I have been told," he said, and the corner of his mouth moved. "Their son was born on the 28th of September in 1883. He arrived, as Dolores Reyes observed with professional approval, efficiently and without undue drama, which Lenora found to be a deeply satisfying description of a birth. He was healthy and loud, and had his father's gray eyes and his mother's dark hair, and seemed from the very first hours to regard the world with an expression of focused assessment that made Donnelly sit down heavily in the chair beside the bed and say, "He already looks skeptical." "Good," Lenora said, holding the baby with the particular steadiness she brought to every new thing she picked up for the first time. "There is a great deal worth being skeptical about." They named him Thomas Elias Donnelly. Thomas for the grandfather who had built the foundation, and Elias for the man who had honored it. Henry Fells had stood outside in the hall for the entire duration of the birth, refusing to go home despite being told repeatedly that there was nothing for him to do. And when Donnelly came out and told him the baby had arrived and everyone was well, Henry turned brick red and appeared to briefly consider hugging Donnelly before settling on a handshake of extraordinary vigor. The town of Redemption Creek received the news with the same invested warmth that it had received all the news regarding the Donnellys, and there was a flow of food to the ranch over the following week that was both generous and somewhat overwhelming in volume. Lenora recovered with the same focused practicality that she brought to everything, following Dolores' instructions to the letter and returning to her full workload within 6 weeks, the baby in a purpose-built cradle in the main room so that she could hear him from anywhere in the house. The ranch in the autumn of 1883 was a different thing from the ranch of 2 summers ago. It had 12 healthy cattle and 2 horses and a working vegetable garden and a repaired roof and 2 capable hands, and the accumulated investments of a household that had resources enough to maintain itself with room to grow. The deed was framed on the study wall, next to a photograph of Thomas Sutton that Lenora had found in a box of his things after she had cleared out the study, a young man's face, 25 perhaps, standing in front of a fence with a hand on his hip and a squint at the sun. Donnelly had looked at the photograph for a long time when she hung it. "He looks like you," he said. "People say that," she said. "Good people to look like," he said. There was a trial in January of 1884. Not the Voss trial that was long finished, but a separate case, a land claim challenge by a group of small landholders whose deeds had been compromised by secondary transactions in the Voss fraud operation. It was complicated, and it required a great deal of legal work, and Donnelly threw himself into it with the same thoroughness he brought to everything, and Lenora sat with him some evenings going through the documentation, because she had her father's gift for records and his habit of seeing patterns in numbers that other people missed. She found 3 discrepancies in the secondary deed filings that proved instrumental to the case. The judge, a federal appointee named Harrington who was widely considered one of the sharper legal minds in the territory, noted in his decision that the evidentiary groundwork had been exceptional. "He is talking about your analysis," Donnelly said, showing her the decision over breakfast. "He is talking about the case generally," she said. "He is specifically talking about the deed analysis," he said, pointing to the relevant passage. She looked at it. She looked at him. He had the look of a man who was very pleased on someone else's behalf and was not attempting to hide it. "You submitted my work under the case evidence," she said. "With attribution," he said. "Your name is in the case record." She looked at the decision again. There was her name in the formal record of a federal court decision, Lenora Donnelly, analysis of secondary deed filings. It sat there in black ink and was quietly extraordinary. "Thank you," she said. "It was accurate," he said. "It belonged in the record." She looked at him. There was the particular warmth in her chest that had become the normal condition of her days, that sustained warmth that she had not known before this year and intended to keep as long as she lived. "I want to learn more about land law," she said. "Formally, there must be materials, books, correspondence courses." "There are," he said immediately. "I can write to the Territorial Library in Santa Fe, and Werner Fels mentioned that a woman in Albuquerque has been working as a legal clerk, and there is some discussion of formal accreditation." She looked at him. "You have already been thinking about this," she said. "Since November," he said. "When I watched you work through the deed analysis and I thought, she is better at this than most people I have worked with, and the territory needs people who are good at this." She looked at him for a moment, and the feeling was that warmth again, and also something more specific, the feeling of being recognized in the exact form that you are and having that recognition be generous instead of reductive. "Write to Santa Fe," she said. He nodded. He already had paper out. The spring of 1884 brought rain, which was rare enough in New Mexico territory to be discussed as a gift and a wonder, and the ranch grass came in green and deep, and the cattle grew fat, and the garden produced abundantly, and Thomas Elias Donnelly, who was 6 months old and had developed strong opinions about everything from the temperature of his bottle to the competence of the individuals in his immediate environment, regarded all of it from the safety of the carrying cloth Lenora had fashioned from canvas and worn through all her daily work, the baby facing outward, examining the world with what Lenora was increasingly convinced was his father's analytical gaze. Henry Fels had become genuinely attached to the baby in the way that people sometimes become attached to children when they have not expected to, and could be found of an evening sitting on the porch with Thomas on his knee, talking to him in a mixture of English and German about horses and fence posts, and what Henry apparently considered to be the philosophical implications of weather patterns. And the baby would look at him with complete focused attention, and Henry would look back with an expression of unprecedented openness. "He is going to be a very interesting person," Lenora said to Donnelly one evening, watching this from the doorway. "Henry or Thomas?" Donnelly said. "Both," she said. "But I meant Thomas." Donnelly was standing behind her, and he put his arm around her shoulders, and she leaned back against him, and they watched their son examine Henry Fells with complete seriousness in the evening light. "He has your determination," Donnelly said. "And your patience," she said. "A formidable combination," he said. "Yes," she said. "It is." In the summer of 1884, Elias Donnelly was reappointed to the position of Sheriff of Redemption Creek by popular election, which was now the formal process in the territory, winning by a margin that the territorial newspaper described as reflecting extraordinary community confidence. Lenora went to the vote counting at the town hall with Thomas on her hip, and watched the numbers go up on the board, and felt a warm, uncomplicated pride that she did not attempt to moderate. Donnelly accepted the reappointment with a brief speech in which he thanked the community for their confidence, and said that the work of keeping a community safe and just was the work of the community itself, that he simply served as its instrument, and that Redemption Creek was one of the finest communities he had the privilege of being part of, which made Mrs. Alvarez cry in the front row and made Lenora, standing at the back with the baby, smile in the way that she smiled when something was exactly what it should be. He found her after, and she put Thomas in his arms, and the baby grabbed immediately for the badge on his vest, which was his consistent habit, and Donnelly held him with the confident ease of a father who had been doing this for 6 months, and said to the baby, "Not yet. Give it a few years." Thomas pulled at the badge and made a sound of determined displeasure. "He has your stubbornness," Donnelly said to Lenora, "and your authority," she said. "He knows what he wants and expects to get it. Where does he get that from?" Donnelly said. She looked at him with complete serenity. "I have no idea," she said. In September, on Thomas's first birthday, they had a small gathering at the ranch. The Calderon family, Werner and Henry Fells, Dollars Rays, Ben Quarry and his new wife, a cheerful woman from Texas named Alma who had arrived in Redemption Creek 6 months ago, and had immediately and efficiently decided that Ben Quarry was going to marry her, which he had done with the air of a man who had recognized immediately that this was true. They ate outside in the warm September evening, and the birthday boy sat in the grass with a piece of cake that he regarded with the analytical intensity he brought to all new things before consuming it with total commitment. And the adults talked and laughed, and the children of the Calderon family ran between the tables, and the lamplight stretched out warm across the desert yard. Lenora sat beside her husband and held his hand under the table and watched the people she had come to love in this improbable, hard-won life, and she thought about the night 14 months ago when she had ridden 40 miles through the dark to warn a man she had never met, and had walked through a door she had not known was the door to everything. She thought about her father's handwriting in the records box. She thought about the deed on the study wall and his photograph beside it. She thought about the particular feeling of being told, by a man who meant what he said, that she was staying here, and how she had thought it was an imposition, and how it had turned out to be an invitation into the thing that would change her life. Donnelly turned and looked at her as if he had felt her thinking. "What?" he said. "I was thinking about the first night," she said. "When you proposed to me," he said. "I did not propose to you on the first night," she said. "You were building to it," he said. She pressed her lips together to contain the laugh. "I was thinking about when you told me I was staying," she said. "I was so angry at you." "You were not angry," he said. "You were tired and in pain and a little frightened, which you would not have admitted." "I was not frightened," she said. He looked at her with the particular expression that meant he was letting her have the statement even though he did not fully agree with it. "I was perhaps," she said, uncertain. "About what?" he said. She looked at the yard, the lamplight, the people, the dark hills beyond. "About whether someone telling me to stay in a room was going to turn out to be the beginning of something I wanted," she said. "I was uncertain about what it meant." "And now," he said. She looked at him. The man who had held her father's trust, who had kept a promise to a dead man by protecting what that man had built, who had told her the truth when the truth was hard. who had learned to be present without intruding and helpful without implying she needed it, and who had put a ring on her finger that was exactly the color of the New Mexico sky. "Now I know what it meant," she said. He squeezed her hand. Thomas, having finished the cake with thorough conviction, had crawled across the grass to the edge of the lamplight, and was sitting there looking at the dark desert beyond with an expression of absolute fascinated contemplation, as though he was already measuring it, already beginning to understand the size and shape of the world he had been born into. Lenora watched her son, and her husband reached over and tucked a piece of her hair back behind her ear with the simple, intimate ease of a man who has lived alongside a person long enough that tenderness is as automatic as breathing. "He is going to want a ride soon," Donnelly said, watching Thomas. "He is not yet 1 year old," she said. "He is already looking at the horses like he is considering them," he said. She looked at her son, who was in fact now turned toward the corral where the horses were standing in the evening dark. She thought about her father naming every horse after a Roman emperor. She thought about the kind of child who would grow up on this land in this house, with two people who between them had more stubbornness and more principle and more love for this particular corner of the world than any two people had a right to. A good kind of child, she thought, a fortunate one. "Aurelio can start teaching him in a few years," she said. "He has a gift with horses." "And with people," Donnelly said. She looked at him. "You have been keeping an eye on Aurelio." "He is a good man," Donnelly said. "Young, 23. He has been here 2 years, and he has made this ranch better, and he has not once been treated as well as he deserves by the culture of this territory, which I intend to do something about from a legal standpoint when the right opportunity arises." She looked at him. "The right opportunity," she said. "I have been corresponding with a lawyer in Albuquerque about equitable labor protections," he said. "It will take time. The territory's statehood push is going to be complicated by questions of who counts as a full citizen and who does not. I intend to be on the right side of that." She looked at him steadily and completely, and with the full warmth of what she felt for him. "Thomas Sutton would have liked you enormously," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "I hope so," he said. "I think about what he would say about a great many things." "He would say," she said, "that you are exactly the kind of man he hoped would look after what he built, not as a caretaker, as a builder, adding to it." Donnelly held her hand and looked at the yard and the people and the lamplight and the dark hills, and his face had the quality of a man who is completely and undividedly in the place he is, not thinking about the past or the future, but simply present in the fullness of a life that has become exactly what it should be. "Come on," he said, standing and drawing her to her feet. "Thomas is getting closer to the fence, and I would prefer to stop him before he tries to climb it." "He cannot climb," she said, standing. "He is considering it," Donnelly said. They walked together across the lamplight to their son, who looked up at them from the grass with his father's gray eyes and his mother's dark hair, and an expression of complete and confident expectation, as though he had already understood that the two people walking toward him were the whole world, and that the world was good, and that this land under the New Mexico sky was his to love and his to tend and his to build upon, and that he had come from something strong and true and would grow into something stronger. Lenora picked him up and held him on her hip and looked out at the dark hills that her father had looked at and that she had looked at all her life and that her son would look at for all of his. The stars were coming out above the high desert, bright and clear and numerous. The ranch was whole. The case was closed. The land was hers. And the man beside her, who had looked at a woman who came to warn him and had seen something in her that he chose, who had said with the quiet certainty that was simply how he was made, "You are staying here," was everything she had not known to look for and had found anyway, in the particular way that the most important things are found, not by looking but by riding through the dark with a purpose and walking through the right door. She leaned her head against his shoulder, and the night was warm and the stars were clear and the crickets sang in the scrub, and the horses moved softly in the corral and Redemption Creek lay 3 miles west, and the whole wide territory stretched out around them in every direction, full of everything that was still hard and everything that was still beautiful and everything that was still possible. She stayed. She always had.